afternoon. My name is Carol Toole, and today is Wednesday, April 30th, and we're in Mangum, Oklahoma, interviewing Glynadee Edwards as part of the Voices of Extension Oral History. And so we want to thank you, Glynadee, for joining us today.
Well, I'm honored.
Well, we want to talk a little bit about your early life. And so tell us a little bit about your life and where were you born?
I was born in Mangum, right here in Greer County. I grew up at a community about 11 miles west of here called Reed on the farm. At that time we had a 80-acre farm, which we've now expanded to 278 acres. I live on the home place now. I've moved back. And I grew up out there with my mother and father and one little brother and all that. So we were farmers and part ranchers.
Okay, that's great. And how did your family come to live in Greer County?
That's probably one of the hardest questions you're going to ask me all day. For some reason, my aunt and uncle, my dad's aunt and uncle moved here. Now, my dad's side of the family is originally from Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, Aunt Bonnie and Uncle Homer moved here, and then my grandmother and grandfather Edwards followed them. And then, of course, my father was actually raised at Cordell.
Okay.
And all that. So he wasn't raised that far from here. Mm-hmm. He was born at Saddle Mountain. My mom, however, was born in Minnesota and grew up in California.
Oh.
And met Dad in the Army when he was in the Army out there for the war.
Okay.
And then when they got married, they moved back here. And that's about all. And I said, you always wish you'd ask people how they ended up here.
Right.
And now it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah, people change. So they've been out on the home place since they were married.
They moved here in 1945. My mom had never been away from home.
Uh-oh.
Grew up in California, you know, and Daddy put her in the Model T, and they drove back from California to Reed, Oklahoma.
Wow.
And all that, and my mom grew to love it.
Yeah.
She never wanted to go back to California.
Mm-hmm.
She loved it in the farm, and that's where she lived until her death.
That's wonderful. When you were growing up, what did your parents do for a living?
My dad was a farmer, and my mom helped him. And then when I was about in the 5th grade, my mom started doing book work at the elevators, grain elevators. Mm-hmm. She was also a waitress. Yeah. She worked at the cotton gin. She was bookkeepers there. Part-time job, nothing professional or anything like that. But Dad was a farmer, and he also worked at the livestock sale out here for 18 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And it used to be quite a livestock
yes, it did.
Sale barn, didn't it?
It was big, and the cooks out there for Tuesday were unbelievable, but they pulled a lot of cattle through here back then.
Right. Describe any interactions your family had with extension educators.
I know Dad would always ask the extension educator at that time about crops, maybe what should we do differently. And this was back before we had herbicides and all that, so we learned to hoe cotton, and it was all dry land and all that, and they would talk to the educators. Now, my mom was a member of back then it was a Farm Women's Club. Right. And so she worked with the educators in that, or as they were called then, home demonstration agents. Right. She worked with them in that respect and everything, and they were always out of the club and everything like that. Right.
And so, being from Reed and the rural area, you were introduced to 4-H then, weren't you?
9 years old, Of course, that was, and I'll explain that, back when I was growing up, it was a school. It happened during school.
Right. Okay.
So, a lot more kids joined 4-H because they'd get out of classes, But my parents were the kind that if you were going to be a member, you were going to participate, you were going to be active. Right. And so, that's when I got into 4-H, and back when I started in 4-H, there were the girls' projects and the boys' projects. And so, whether I liked it or not, I had to learn to sew, and I always loved to cook, and I had to learn to can, and everything like that. And I could show animals, but I couldn't be on a livestock judging team because I was a girl.
Oh, that's different, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's a lot of difference.
Well, so that touches a little bit on the 4-H meetings, but so they were in school. Some of the projects were just for boys, and some of the projects were just for girls. And did they conduct the meetings similar to what they do today, or?
It was much more structured. It's how you'd like to have your 4-H meetings today, but you don't always get there. There was always the officers that conducted the meetings. You always had at least 1 or 2 speeches or demonstrations during the meeting. You had to, if you're a 4-H member, you had to do one.
Right.
And all that. And so, very, I don't want to say strict, very parliamentarily followed.
Right.
And that's the way you'd like to teach kids today.
Right.
But it's not always possible.
Right.
You know, and all that.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Talk about some of the leaders and agents who were involved in 4-H back
Well,
then.
My mom, you know, and back then, and I think probably you'll see it in some of the other counties, back then our parents were very involved as leaders. My mom was a leader. Linda Burcham was a leader. Lavoy Barton was a leader. And, you know, these are all the women that were in the Farm Women's Club.
Right.
And all that. My educators when I started was Lois DeMond, and she was that forever. I guess she's the only one I really had. And then the ag agents we had were Howard Powell, we had a Mr. Salee, and then Bud Barnes came to Grady County, from Grady County here, and all that. So, you know, you found that the people of the community were your leaders.
Right.
And they worked really hard with the clubs.
Right. That's wonderful. How did your involvement in 4-H help shape your family life?
I think it's the fact that we were taught that if we were going to have a project, whether it was a rabbit or chickens or clothing, that it was our project and we were to do it. And Dad, you know, would help us with the livestock, but Dad wasn't one to go and feed and water them. You know, he'd tell us what to feed and water. And my mom actually learned to sew when I did.
Okay.
So we kind of taught each other. I ended up being a much better baker than my mom. My mom didn't like to bake, but she was a very good cook, you know. So she would help me. She taught me how to measure and everything like that. We kind of did it together, won and lost together.
Right.
But Dad was always there to help us. But he said, they're your animals, your projects, you do them.
Yeah, yeah. How are you different as a result of being involved in 4-H?
For those who know me, they probably would have never thought that I was a quiet and shy girl. I was not one to talk to a lot of people. I didn't like to be in crowds. I didn't want to be in front of people. But one of the things that my parents did was, if you're going to be in 4-H, part of it is public speaking.
Yeah.
You're going to give speeches, you're going to give demonstrations, whether you like it or not, you know, you're going to do it. I commend them today for that, because once I got into high school, it was no big deal, but then when I went to college, you know, there's people that enrolled in college in public speaking that were scared to death. To me, I'd been through 5, 6 years of 4-H, 10 years of 4-H, giving speeches.
Right.
It didn't bother me.
Right.
You know, and so it really helped me develop to be better at speaking, not being afraid to speak. And people will probably, that know me, will go, her, afraid? But I was a very shy little girl, and it helped a lot. Public speaking did.
That's wonderful. Can you describe any projects that really stand out, which you participated in through 4-H? And also, what did you learn or accomplish?
I think I enjoyed cooking. Back then it was called food preparation. I love that. I love to cook today. Canning was interesting. It can also be a horror story, and I have some of those.
Yeah.
And I really believe that the livestock projects that I had, even though, you know, back then we raised our own animals, we ate our own animals, they certainly taught you responsibility.
Right.
And the life skills you can learn if you raise animals for the right reason, or the life skills you can learning to cook, will last forever. I mean, to this day, I still love to cook. I love to bake. And if I had my way, I'd have a brand new kitchen that all I did was cook.
Right.
For me,
because it's a hobby. And
it is.
for
It is.
you. That's great. Well, I know we've enjoyed a lot of your great baking and cooking at the free fair and the
Yes.
junior livestock show.
Yes.
We're going to go back to, you were telling us a little bit about 4-H Congress.
Back when I was in 4-H, there was a trip called 4-H Congress, and there were two of us from Greer County that went, a boy from Granite, Wayne Grauman, and we were taken to Oklahoma City, and we got to tour the Capitol and everything like that. And one of the highlights of it was, back then is when the national winners, or the state winners, went to Chicago for the National 4-H Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to see them off on the train.
Oh, yeah.
So we'd get to go down to the station, and they'd have their white scarves on and get on the train, and the state delegates would bid the national delegates, goodbye and all that and good luck.
Mm-hmm.
And as those that know 4-H history, Oklahoma especially, we had several national winners. And it was always exciting for us to get to see them, to go off, and then to meet our representatives and our senators
Right.
and learn about the government.
Mm-hmm.
Because back then, in those days, the schools didn't always take you to the Capitol. I mean, that was a long way for us to go because Interstate 40 wasn't there.
Oh, my gosh.
You went through all the little towns getting to Oklahoma City
Right.
and all that. And Wayne and I, of course, somebody took us up there, but then we had to ride the bus home, the Greyhound bus home that,
Oh.
we call it the milk bus that stopped at every little town.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to come up. But it was fun. I mean,
Yeah.
it was exciting for us from a small county. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds fun. It sounds
Yeah.
great.
It was.
Can you describe some of the people that you met along the way? Some people that stood out to you that made a difference in your 4-H career?
I think you always look up to the older 4-Hers. And back then I had the Jerry Heppels, and I had there were some, Linda Bartram and I will always laugh about the Grauman girls from Granite that were such good cooks. You always looked up to them because you always wanted to be like them.
Mm-hmm.
And even the educators are what we call county agents and all that. You always respected them and thought, boy, if I could just affect people the way they are,
Mm-hmm.
then I've made something in life.
Right.
And Bud Barnes just will always stand out in my life, even though I didn't have him most, and Mr. Powell, they'd come out, they cared what we did, they cared that we had projects.
Right.
And it was wonderful, that they cared that much about, it wasn't just me, because back when I was growing up, we had 10 or 11 schools in the county, whereas now we only have 2.
Right.
And so it wasn't this against this, it was the county and everything.
Right.
And there was always a guy from, he's from OCES, that I just thought, oh, he's the greatest, he can do just anything. I had a friend from Granite that, Larry West, in fact, I saw him last year, and he always wanted me to help him show his pigs. Well, he showed Chester Whites, which back in those days you used baby powder on them.
Mm-hmm.
You'd powder them. Chester Whites, and even the whites today, are known to fight. So I would come out after showing their pigs looking like Casper the Ghost, because the powder would fly, and then I'd go to my swine, and they were the Polands and the Durocs. They're like, where have you been,
Mm-hmm.
But it's just the people that you work with, that you showed animals with, that you went to camp with,
Right.
and all that. It's just, and you see a lot of them today, and you think, gosh, do you remember? And you go,
Mhm.
yeah.
Reminisce about
Reminisce about it and everything
Mhm.
like that. So
Yeah. Well, looking back on your involvement with 4-H, is there anything of interest historically which you would like to share?
I think, and it's really funny, and it's for those of us that grew up here, back when we were growing up and showing animals, the snack bar was in the livestock barn.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that back then the show started pretty early in the morning, and you'd start getting hungry, and you're out there showing animals, and they're cooking these really good smelling hamburgers over in the corner, and you can smell them, and your stomach's starting to growl, and you're trying to remember, oh, I'm supposed to watch where the judge is and make my animal look good, and all you can smell are these hamburgers. And then in our fair barn out here, our livestock barn, we didn't have heaters. We had what we called smudge pots. And what they did is they used oil. And how we all kept from ending up with lung cancer, I don't know. But you'd come out of there after you've shown for a day or two, and you'd come out and you'd get this black stuff out of your body forever. You know, it's like, gosh, was that probably the safest thing? But back then we didn't, that's why we heated and all that. So there was a lot of fun, you know. 4-H camp to me was always the highlight. You know, back in my 4-H years, you really had to earn a trip to Roundup. You didn't automatically get to go.
Right.
So I didn't go to Roundup as much as the kids get to today, but 4-H camp, you know, especially since we had what we called the junior camp, which was Greer and Grady camp. And then we had a district camp, which was just the teen leaders.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a lot of fun because you had a very close district down this way. And
right.
fun, you know, friends. You know, you always think, do you remember when? Yes, I do remember when.
Is there anything that you would like to add that we've not spoken about today? Anything that you'd like to share with us that we haven't touched on?
I think, number one, I think 4-H is probably the best organization you could have. And I don't know that OSU would ever admit it, but I believe 4-H brings a lot of kids to the campus that end up going there. And they're not just everyday kids, they're the cream of the crop. I feel that the 4-Hers are the cream of the crop of anything. I mean, they may exceed in basketball, they may exceed in softball, but the life skills that you can learn through 4-H will last you forever.
Right.
And I've been so privileged to have grown up in 4-H and then have been a leader for so many years and seen the kids grow. And it makes you sad, but then it makes you very glad when you see them succeed.
Yes.
And all that. And I think there is nothing any better in this world than the 4-H program. And OSU is very strong in its 4-H program, and they develop not only youth, but adults and leaders. And they have a very good volunteer program, and I'm honored to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. We're honored. On behalf of the Greer County Cooperative Extension, we want to thank you for your service.
Well, thank you. Thanks for letting me.
And your time today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Carol.